Hello, everybody. Welcome to the JEDI Conversations, JEDI Disrupt. These are direct, no-nonsense discussions with leaders on technology and science. My name is André Dezecourt-Pietri. I'm the director of JEDI. JEDI is, as you know, launching technological grand challenges to solve some of our society's biggest challenges in healthcare and environment, in digital and around the oceans. And we are absolutely delighted to have today Jaan Tallinn, who is, you'll tell me if the title is exact, Jaan, the founding engineer and the co-founder of Casa and of Skype. So we all have used and we all use these tools. So we're delighted to have you. So he's a leading thinker on existential risks. I think he donated more than $1 million on this, in particular to the Future of Life Institute. So without further ado, Jaan, tell us which technologies, especially in the AI sector, could prove existentially dangerous for humanity.
First of all, hello, thanks for having me. My top three right now are AI, sufficiently advanced AI. Then various biotechnology, especially like synthetic biology, humans doing things that evolution never figured out how to. And third are basically unknowns, because both of those two, plus like various kind of big catastrophic risks like nuclear, they are like less than 100 years old. So like who knows what the next 100 years will bring.
And if we dive specifically into AI, there is a bit of conflicting thing here. Is we saw with this major COVID-19 crisis, some people consider that actually AI has not proven as kind of the golden solution to all our problems, with all the existential risks linked to it. What is your take? Have we overhyped the importance of AI, especially in the capacity of humanity to anticipate the future?
I think it's kind of two separate questions. One is like, how do you assess the technology that you already have, and like, are you going to kind of like make it look more flashy than it actually is? Sometimes quite often people have incentives to kind of hype the technology that they happen to be in the process of inventing or commercializing, and the AI is like very vulnerable to that. Like sometimes it's just like people have something that can be solved using an Excel table, and then they're gonna hype it as like the latest in AI advances. And then there's a separate question which I'm interested in, is like, what is the potential of this technology? And I think it's a very convincing argument to say that there is clearly something that separates us from monkeys, from like other primates, from other mammals, and whatever we call it, let's call it intelligence. And that dimension, even if it is a multidimensional thing, that kind of potential multidimensional property that separates us from other mammals has enabled us to dominate the environment here. So like, if we are falling all over ourselves to yield that dominant position to something that is not human, we should kind of think 2 steps ahead, like what will end up the environment to look like. The reason why we have driven so many species extinct is not that we are kind of actively hostile towards those species, but we have just changed the environment too much. And being biological is something that works to our disadvantage when it comes to AI. AI can tolerate like way larger environmental disruptions than we can. Like, just, I mean, when it comes to global warming, we're talking about 4-degree kind of changes to the world temperature as like something catastrophic. I mean, 4 degrees is like nothing compared to the changes that are possible, physically possible. So it's and the AI just wouldn't even notice change like that. So it's like, we should be very careful when we are introducing a new type of agent potentially in the future to our shared environment.
What is your take? I mean, we see that innovation and risks are obviously very interlinked. What is your take on what is agitating democracies everywhere? Is how can we promote on one side the use of new technologies because they can bring something positive, and obviously what you just mentioned is that we don't necessarily know the impact that they could have. How do we avoid curtaining innovation and still keeping our values and our humanity? And I think it's a very important topic, especially affecting democracies. I mean, we see authoritarian states have much less scruples in pushing forward technology.
Yeah, it's always like really acute, a question that becomes more and more acute, and it's not obvious what the answer here is. I can kind of like just provide like kind of fragments or building blocks for the answer, but I definitely don't have like a full answer. Also, I would say that like some authoritarian regimes like China, in some ways they are like I mean, you said that you're kind of less scrupulous. I think like there's like a positive way of putting it. Like in an authoritarian regime, you can be kind of more coordinated when it comes to your technological trajectory. Therefore, you can do things like Future of Humanity Institute, one of the institutes that I support in Oxford, has kind of published the concept of differential technological development. The idea is that when you see potential dangerous technology, yet you see an opportunity to kind of fund an antidote or cure or like a defensive technology to that, then it's strategically useful to do that. And authoritarian regimes, actually, if they are sufficiently smart about it, are in a good position to actually advance this strategic plan, whereas like democracy is actually being like a more mechanisms with more moving parts are in a disadvantaged position. So it's not just like kind of democracy is good, authoritarian regimes bad. Like I think it's in some ways authoritarian regimes. Like I'm not saying I don't want to defend them in the sense that like clearly they have like a lot of downsides. But when it comes to like navigating future like turbulent waters, they might actually have a real advantage that we as species might have to step into. Now, when it comes to solutions, like, yeah, I don't know. I do think that there are some interesting ideas being explored when it comes to governance innovation. Like one thing that democracy is like thousands of years old, and it really hasn't adopted much with the latest technology. I mean, Estonia here has like some of the latest stuff implemented, but in general, the progress has been rather slow and in some ways kind of justifiably so. But clearly there are some ideas, some people are working on things like mechanism design. Glenn Weil, for example, with his radical exchange community, thinking about like how can we make the democracy more democratic in some sense, or like how to, for example, like one idea would be to separate two functions of democracy. One is the polling the electorate for values, and the other function is to come up with policy proposals. Right now, they're kind of lumped into one thing, but ideally what we want to do is like ask people like where do you want to go, and then like use things like prediction markets or some properly designed mechanisms to figure out what is the best way to get there, rather than kind of trusting these decisions as part of the policy debates, to be solved by policy debates.
What is your take on Europe regarding AI? Do you think there's a clear understanding and strategy? Because what you mentioned before with authoritarian regimes is that there's this capacity to have probably for bad reasons, but this more strategic view. I think this is what you meant.
Yeah.
How do you assess Europe's progress? I mean, before the confinement, we were all going to conferences where we kept being repeated that China and the US is racing ahead. First, is this a race, and how do you see Europe in this
First of all, I think it's good. That's important to kind of divide two aspects of AI progress. So one piece of it is sort of the fundamental progress in fundamental algorithms, for progress in the science of AI, and the other is progress in the engineering of various products and services that rely on the fundamental breakthroughs. I have this model that I call drill and the city. So it's like there's like this. You can imagine a city that has some like drilling operation in the middle, and you have like fundamental AI research that kind of drills deeper and deeper into intelligence algorithms, and then you have an ecosystem of various commercial and whatnot initiatives that take the results and package them, or like take the results of AI research and train them for particular
use cases.
And I think that almost all the visible progress, it happens above the ground. So when people have like discussions about like what is the competitiveness of our company or our community or our country or our like group of countries, they think about what's happened above ground. But I do think that in long term, like what happens on the ground is more important. So like I do think that from that sense, like Europe is an interesting position, because I think that the most advanced AI group in the world is in Europe, is DeepMind, although it's owned by the US. So it's like
which I think you have been an early investor in, right?
Yeah, and I was a director of DeepMind before they were sold to Google. So it's yeah, I'm mostly going to pay attention to what happens down there with AI science part, because I think that is the kind of the front that would kind of shape the future.
And could you give us some insights? Where do you see the most advances, or the most interesting, or maybe the most challenging? My next question will be about deepfakes and the adversarial AI that is developed through that.
Yeah, I do think that the world, as a general statement, I think the world will get more strange. Like, if you think that the COVID crisis feels strange, you're right to think so. But like once you have AIs that are able to build structures that the humans don't understand, that is a weird thing. Like you would remember COVID crisis as a period during which the world was nice and understandable. And I do think that things like the Facebook scandals and like the upcoming, I don't think they're still here yet, but upcoming deepfake scandals, they're like early signals or early incidents of AI. Like one way of looking at it is like the entire set of Facebook scandals are results of AI slightly altering the positions of pixels on the screen. So like AI can do way more than just rearrange the pixels on screen. So like, and they already have like things like potential like kind of whole trajectories of countries being changed as a result of this tiny intervention.
I mean, you come from a country which obviously is very sensitive to foreign interference and so on. So tell us about maybe deepfakes a little bit more. Do you see very fast advances on it? Do you see it used? I mean, currently we see it used either against models or against political figures. Do you see it spreading? Is there currently a cure? I mean, I remind you, we're thinking of launching a challenge on that. For the moment, the only ones who are taking care of this is Facebook. We don't think we should leave Facebook alone in determining what is the truth. What is your take?
Yeah, I think there's like a sort of short-term trend of deepfakes becoming easier and easier and falling into the sort of unsuspecting audience that the audience kind of is still used to looking at videos and assuming that they are like constitute evidence.
This is really Jaan Tallinn we have, by the way. It's not a thing, at least to my best knowledge. Please
Why
go.
would? So I lost my train of.
You were saying we see it getting more and more common.
Yeah. So and like the other trend is that kind of societies, as they will get like kind of experience with this, will become kind of more cautious when it comes to assuming that something that you see already has existed, or like is like video is evidence. At which point, basically, I think the long term like deepfakes will not have any chance against cryptography because like at some point when you basically everything is like untrustable, you just have to have everything signed cryptographically in order for the browser to even like if you can put your just like today we don't go like to internet without having like a firewall in the form like you can try taking like Windows 95 out of the box from 15 years ago and connecting it to the internet. Like I don't know, like the machine wouldn't survive like 10 minutes. So like but like we are used to that by building like automated defenses against attacks. So like I do expect that in long term like we will have automated defenses against deepfakes. Deepfakes wouldn't just get eyeballs because they're not authenticated, but before, there is a period of time during which we are vulnerable, just like we were vulnerable to various. I mean, we still are vulnerable to various cyber attacks, but not the ones that were kind of very taking the world by storm like 10 or 15 years ago.
And okay, do you see on this way who is leading the charge on that? I mean, you are supporting a lot of these foundation or academic institutions who are working on this. Do you see companies? You mentioned DeepMind before. Do you see I don't know, philanthropies but directly attacking this issue? Do you see that happening in Europe or in other parts of the world? I mean, can you give us a sense of who is thinking about that alongside you?
I'm fairly optimistic about deepfakes in particular because there's a commercial incentive to solve those. I mean, that's not to say that there wouldn't be like really embarrassing or really potentially catastrophic, like really bad incidents with deepfakes between now and the period during which we have like sufficiently robust defenses. But like during that period, there will be like commercial incentives to push that. And at least one investment comes into mind in my portfolio. I have like over 100 startup investments. Possibly I have more. But one investment is just specifically trying to address the deepfakes.
Very good. Okay, you talked a lot about. I mean, we're coming to the end of this discussion. So one of my last questions would be about you have been a big promoter of AI safety, and especially you had, I think it was a slush. This incredible expression is how do we make AI, and you could take more generally digital safety sexy. And we saw all the debate that there is on tracing apps. How do we make privacy sexy? I mean, what is your take on this? And could that become an incentive or maybe a way to go, especially for the democracies or for the Europeans in particular?
Yeah, I don't think how obvious. I do remember, like I think it was like Stephen Colbert episode, where he did like a test asking people like, do you care about your privacy? Like, do you want to be private from the governments? And people were like, oh, I don't know, I don't care. And then like they did another set of interviews like, are you okay with governments looking at your genital pictures? Like they got a completely different set of answers. So I do think that there's like a communication issue of thinking about what exactly a world without privacy would look like, and perhaps there's also like opportunity to think about like I mean, one way of looking at this privacy is like it's like a currency that you're spending, and you better make sure that you get like some goods for it. So like it's not like obvious like black and white answers there. Okay,
maybe my last question that was also asked by some of the the people who are watching here, and you basically gave it to me when you mentioned about DeepMind. Obviously, DeepMind, as you said, is still probably one of the cradle for the most advanced research on AI. It was acquired by Google. More generally, while we want to keep Europe open, how can we make sure, especially in this crisis where a lot of startups will face liquidity crisis, how can we avoid that there is too much brain drain, or even acquisitions by companies, or even by governments that don't necessarily share the same humanistic values? What is your take on that to close up our discussion?
Yeah, I do think that, I mean, I don't have like strong opinion on like kind of actual regulation. I do think that regulation in general is like very blunt tool. It's like trying to screw in a screw with a jackhammer. So it's better be kind of careful when it comes to putting some regulatory barriers, etc. But I do think that there's like value that US has, and Europe has similar kind of advantage. And US, it seems to be kind of like actually distancing itself from it, which is that there is like a easier, the barrier for talent movement to kind of European and US universities is lower than the barrier to Chinese universities. So I think that there's like one explanation why there is like a lot of like scientific results from the US and Europe is that like they're not like, actually I'm reminded of someone's like a VC who got this question, like, how do we create like Silicon Valley in France? And his answer was hilarious. He said that like, oh, it's totally easy. You just can't do it with French people. Like just like Silicon Valley wasn't done with Americans, right? So it's like that. I think it's valuable to think about like how to use the fact that it's easier to migrate, like for smart people to migrate to US and Europe. And now that US is kind of closing down their borders, like I think I just saw like some announcement that are like kind of starting to revisit the policy of allowing Chinese to study in US universities. Well, we should just take that role.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the number I have in mind is that 70% of the startups created in the Valley are from people who are not from California initially. So it's a huge majority. Jaan, we could go on and go on. So it was really a big pleasure. We're very happy to have also you supporting our JEDI Tallinn hub. I mean, you're a true disruptor and a great thinker on the future. So thank you very much for having been with us, and to all who are listening, see you very soon on our next JEDI disruption conversation. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.